the purpose of a brand is to leave a positive impact on not a person or desired emotional impact. And that's going to be the subject of today's chapter of the Business Library. We're going to be talking about the human side of branding. So you can actually go and have that emotional impact. People buy because of emotion, not logic. I have Rachel Lee on here today because I'm not a branding expert. Don't take that advice from me. Take that advice from her. Her links are down below, including our links for our free courses down below, of course. So check those out if you hear something that you like. Just to start us off, so everybody's on the same page, me, the person watching, and you. What is branding in your eyes?
That is a huge question where there's a lot of misconceptions. When people think about branding, the first thing they think about is the logo because that's the most prominent face of the brand. I like to say that branding is more of a conversation about an experience. And the reason why a lot of the big brands today have gotten to the size that they are and the reason why people love them so much, it's not because of their logo. Let's be honest, there's a lot of cool logos out there. I know because I'm a designer. What actually leaves and what actually is an impactful brand is actually the depth of experience that is created. And it's about creating something that people believe in. Also with my background as somebody who grew up in church and having a deep understanding of what belief systems are, I'm going to go to the extent of saying that branding and the psychology behind it is actually about creating a belief system that people buy into mentally and emotionally. And if you actually take a look at the way a lot of brands are nowadays, like the really big ones with the cult-like followings, like Apple or Nike, and you just talk to the people and ask them about what do they love about their brand, the way that they talk about it, if you just listen to it and the depth of emotion that they speak with and just how they talk about these things that are honestly just products, you think that they're talking about their girlfriend or their pet or like somebody that they love because of how emotionally connected they are with these specific products because of the belief structures that go behind it. I hope that makes sense. I know I went like super high level with that, zoomed way out. But in essence, that is actually what a brand is, and that is why it's actually really complicated.
Oh, I opened the word for fun conversations in the comments in regards to the religions, are they brands as well?
Yeah, I mean, I could even go to the extent of saying that because a brand is just a package. It's a package that kind of encapsulates a set of belief systems, a set of rules, a set of experiences. It's an identity that people buy into. Like, people don't just say, I have Apple products. They call themselves, I'm an Apple user. Right? Like there's something that's interesting in the language that people use. Like when people who use Apple products, they talk about certain things such as the ecosystem and how everything talks to each other. Like every religion, like if we look at it from a belief system, has a set of rule structures and language systems that tie it together. If you look at a brand and the way that it actually is, it actually has all of those same things. It's just not from like a spiritual standpoint, but it still relies a lot on people and what they believe in and meeting them where they're at and saying like, hey, like we believe in the same thing. You actually belong with us. Welcome to the family, right? Like you're going to notice that a lot of big brands actually even use language like that. Of course, it's not like, it's not cultish or anything. It's just, this is how people operate. We operate on belief systems, and it's very natural for us to want to be with people who believe in the same thing, who like the same things, because that means that we are safe. We are part of a community, and from an evolutionary standpoint, that means that you're safe because you're not going to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger when you're alone. That's just years of conditioning that have happened in our brains that led up to this.
20% chance. It might need one of the 4 other people instead of you. You might get lucky.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
In that case, I guess we could be calling the major religions like Islam and Christianity. I guess Buddhism, some of the other ones in Asia is also pretty big. The most successful brands in the world. By that definition.
Yeah, absolutely. If you build a brand right, you're actually going to get a cult-like following. You'd be surprised. It's like borderline creepy, but it's actually really fascinating when you dig into the psychology behind it.
Yeah. Well, don't go too culty, bit of advice for everybody because people don't particularly enjoy that. When you start talking about yourself in third person and get people to have a specific name for you, not just your name, you come up with it yourself. That is too much. If it was somebody else that came up with it, then it's cool. Just like you can't come up with your own nicknames.
Absolutely.
And you also mentioned in the start, in the way of good logos, I believe that the reason why the Apple logo and the Nike logo, taking the two examples you gave, are cool and great logos is because we are tied them to the brand. It's because it's Apple's logo, Nike's logo. They're cool or was cool, however we view it.
Absolutely. Honestly, from a graphic standpoint, there are a lot of really, really great logos out there. And of course, there's a lot that goes into the psychology of breaking down the individual elements, the shapes, the colors, the thickness of the font. Like there's of course a lot that goes into it. But at the end of the day, what actually gives a logo its meaning is actually all of the experiences that support it, where people, when they have a great experience and then you mentally associate it with that logo, suddenly whenever you see that logo, it triggers all of those things back. And it goes back to the way that our brain registers and files all of our thoughts and memories. It's kind of like when you hear a certain song from your childhood, you're immediately going to think about that very specific slice in time. And, like that's where we think about these things such as nostalgia. Why does that even happen? It's because certain things trigger certain parts of our memory or our emotions. And logos actually have that same effect because it's familiar and you associate the experiences you've had tied with that specific graphic. So when a brand first starts out, if I were to be honest, your logo does not mean anything. It actually doesn't. It's a very good way to represent the face of your brand as you're getting started. But what actually adds to the value of your logo and what I would call your brand equity is you continuing to create amazing experiences that people have, that people eventually associate with your logo and everything else that's tied to your brand. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm still with you. I hope
Amazing.
you watching is still with us as well, because I enjoy it. It's actually made for other people. So sometimes I do forget that. Going into, as I alluded a little bit to in the start, that the goal of a brand is to go in and have that emotional impact on a person. So how do you actually go about making sure that you have the desired emotional impact?
If we take a look at branding from a very human perspective and understanding that a brand is an identity, we could even treat a brand almost as a person. And if you look at the way people relate and connect with each other, it's about having things that you share in common. And that's where connection happens. When you're able to create a, oh my God, me too, like emotion from people, that's when you know you've connected. And to be able to create that, especially for your own customers, you have to really understand them, like not just from a marketing standpoint of they are this demographic or they're this statistic. No, guys, humans aren't numbers. You got to talk to your customers and actually really, really listen to them to understand where it is that they're at. Not just what are their pain points, which is a very common marketing conversation, but understand like what are their quirks? What are the things that they watch on TV? What do they do in their free time? What keeps them up at night? What are the things that they want to do that they're too scared to tell people because it's embarrassing, right? Like you got to get really deep in understanding what your customers are like and what they're interested in order to be able to meet them where they're at. So for me, for example, I like to say that business owners, the customers that you work with are often very similar to you. You want to work with people who are similar to you just because there's that big me too. The easiest way to get into the head of your customer is often to kind of take a look at yourself and be like, all right, well, what kind of content do I like binging? What do I tend to like or what do I tend to swipe past, right? If you take a look at your own psychology, you'll very quickly start to understand what would or wouldn't work for your customers. And that is a good starting point, I would say, to understanding how you can connect better. But honestly, the worst thing that you can do is assume. I always tell people, if you're not sure, just go talk to the damn people. Like, they are there easily within your reach. We have social media and the ability to connect with people literally at the push of a button. You could talk to any human around the world. We live in a crazy day and age where you just have access so easily to so many people. So I actually encourage people, at no point should you ever assume. If you don't know, literally just go and talk to people. And even if you do have years of experience, I still find myself in positions where I'm proven wrong. I'm like, I thought that people would like a certain thing, and then I find out in hindsight, like, oh crap, like, no, that's not actually what people are looking for. And it's because I ran with my assumption. So always ask if you're not sure. And the more that you talk to the people who are your customers, the easier it will be to be able to create an experience that actually meets them where they're at on an emotional level.
I do like you mentioning specifically, word escaped my mind. Happens from time to time. Going out actually speaking to people, not assuming. Because generally, our assumptions become crazy. We think about a bunch of silly shit. Just think about the last time that you went out, you said something you didn't feel good about, the other person didn't respond within the first 24 hours, all of the things they thought about you, and they got back to you and were like, I was just busy. And that was actually no deeper meaning. They didn't take it to heart. They're like, all right, I guess my day is going to change. We're not going to meet. I'm going to do something different. And that's just it. And we were also talking about taking it to that next level. However, you can't just go out and ask person, like, let's say you connect with somebody, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You can't just ask them deep question straight up, negate the blank. Who the fuck is this?
That would be just borderline creepy. Don't do that, people, please.
So how do you build up that? Like, how would you go out and do that research, build up that trust so you can ask those deep questions?
Yeah, great question. I would say we're going to go back to elementary school, where we're going to go through making friends 101. Say hi. Ask how you're doing. Make a comment. No, honestly, I wish that they did, because many of us, even as adults, don't know how to do it. It's hilarious.
I missed that class if they had it.
It's okay. Most people, even as adults, still don't know how to do it. It's actually really scary to make friends. And I'd say that the easiest way, and this is for somebody who I make a lot of friends online. I'm one of those weirdos where, as a kid, people were like, don't talk to strangers. And I talk to strangers for a living. So you after doing it enough, it becomes easier. And I'd say, especially when you're putting yourself out there and you're doing networking, there are things that you should do and things you shouldn't. And of course, especially in the world of business, when it comes to etiquette, like, don't go in and start pitching people right away. Like, that's just rude. I'm sorry. Like, please don't do stuff like that. Go in and be curious about that person. I feel like people really don't, I feel like people often miss the mark when they go in from a networking standpoint, and you're going in, you're like, I'm going to do my market research. You look like somebody who would buy my products. Let me grill you with questions. I'm like, no. Like, don't do that. Like, why don't you just get to know them better? Like, reach out to them. And I mean, if you actually have a specific motive in mind and you're actually looking for information, you could be straight up about it. Like, it's okay. And you could say, like, hey, I just came across your LinkedIn profile. It's great. By the way, it's great to meet you. This is who I am. Introduce yourself and say, like, hey, like, I am actually looking to develop a product or service that would actually, I believe, would be a great support to someone like you. Just from what I see on your LinkedIn profile, I'm actually doing some user research. I would love to, like, if you have a few moments of your time just to ask a few questions and then maybe offer something in exchange. If you want to go the direct route, if you want to just have a group of people that you eventually attract into your world in a more organic way, just reach out to people and really get to know them. Be like, hey, like, I saw XYZ on your profile and I thought that was really cool because and then insert some sort of Me Too statement. It's like, and I really resonated with that because like, that's like me. And, that's how you build rapport and relationship. It's a two-way street, but it always starts with you showing interest in what's going on in the other person's world. Every toxic relationship ever started with you going in and talking about yourself. I'm sorry, people do not give a shit about that. They want you to go in and be like, hey, like, I think what's going on in your world is pretty cool. Can we get to know each other better? Right? I think you're awesome. And I think it would be really cool to get into a conversation with you. Is that something you're open to? And when you lean in with that sense of curiosity, people lower their guards, and not in a way in which you could take advantage of them, but they're more willing to share with you because they're like, oh, this person actually cares. They're not here to pitch me or manipulate me or, like there's a lot of weirdos online. And nowadays people, their guards are way up because we have been burned too many times by too many people who are trying to treat us like numbers or statistics and instead of just normal human beings. So what I always recommend is the human approach. Go in and ask questions, be curious, just do the human thing and be like, I think what you got going on is cool. Do you want to, I want to get to know you better. Can we hop on a chat? Is that something you're open to? And always ask for permission is something that I will say in anything, business and personal. Always ask for permission if you're not sure.
Well, as long as you don't hold a gun to the head or like a knife or something, I think you're cool. Don't threaten them, like beating them up if they don't jump on the call. Talking about an extra thing you can do with the direct approach, and it actually took us, I believe, 16 minutes to mention the word positioning in a branding episode, which is, I think, is a new record across the internet. But to position yourself better, try to position them as the teacher if you're doing a direct reach out. They are teaching you something because we love to teach. At least most people do, especially if you're in like that small business space where a bunch of them are coaches and consultants and that area. Like, they're all teachers. They'll love to teach you something, even for free. They'll do that happily. So if you can position them as the teacher, they'll be a lot more likely to open up with you. And then you can ask a lot more weird questions.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, you'd be surprised, right? Like, there's so many people who would be more than happy to answer your question, but you have to make sure you approach them the right way. I feel like a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn, there's just something weird about the atmosphere on LinkedIn where most people, they feel like they have to put up this really big professional front. Look at me, I'm a speaker. I've got all these awards. I have this many businesses. Look at how big and important I am. And when you lead a conversation like that, I'm just going to kind of use a dating analogy, at least from the female perspective. Okay. Like when dudes approach me like that on like dating platforms like Tinder, like back when I used it like many years ago, I would immediately look at that. I'd laugh and I'd be like, okay, I don't think there's any conversation that's going to happen here, because if you think that's going to impress me, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a conversation with a real human being. If you think that I like you just because of your credentials, I'm sorry, you've missed the mark. It's actually the same thing in the world of business. Yes, feel free to introduce yourself to provide context, right? Like, hey, like, I do branding for people and I'm actually in the process of creating a service that I think would help a lot of small business owners like you. I'm in the process of just coming to understand what people need, though. And I feel like you might be someone, and of course, prove me wrong if my assumptions are wrong, who might benefit from it. Would you mind if I ask you a few questions? And in exchange, I'm happy to offer a free 60-minute consultation to support you with any of the branding needs that you might need, right? Like, you don't have to like give enough for context, but you don't have to like fire hose with people and stuff all of your credibility down their throat before like you start talking. Like, give a little bit of context, do introduce yourself, but you don't have to go to the far extent of like putting your resume out there before you start talking, because what people really care for is they're like, I just want a really normal human interaction here. It's okay to ask questions and it's okay to ask for help. It's just a matter of approaching it from the right angle and doing it in a way that's respectful at the end of the day. That's what people want.
Yeah, and how do we approach branding from the right angle? I couldn't resist asking that question when you said from the right angle.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, like you said at the beginning of this conversation, it's a very human-centric conversation. And a lot of people often get caught up in the way that it looks, because branding, it is about the way that things are packaged and communicated. But if you get to the core of it, it's about creating an experience that makes people feel at home. And every brand is so vastly different. It's hard to exactly pinpoint what the formula is for every brand, because it actually is different. For my brand, for example, it's a mixture of there's fun, there's a little bit of bite to it. It's kind of cutesy and kind of bubbly. It's very happy and high energy, but there are still times where we get shit done. Like, it's a mix of all of those things. But every time you message me, part of the experience is I'm always going to respond with some sort of emoji in there. Like, that's just part of it, because I'm very expressive. That experience ties into the way that you experience me in conversation. I talk the exact same way that I type, right? So that's like consistent experience, and you can expect that every single time. You can expect me to respond a certain way with a certain time frame. You can expect the quality of my services or what I put out. You can expect me to make a post about my plants or my cat or my work at least once a day. Like, those are the things I consistently talk about. And those are like, and etc. Sometimes about the games that I nerd out over, or something just small random that I freak out over. But those are things I can list out that are a part of the core experience that people come to know as me. And of course, the cat ears. People, when they think of pink and or cats, they're like, it's Rachel. Like, I've gotten to that point where I've trained people to think of this, so that when people sometimes randomly see something pink or black out there, and they would literally take a picture and send it to me on Instagram. They'd be like, hey, Rachel, I saw these shoes the other day at the store and I thought of you. And I'm like, oh, I'm honored. Like, that's so sweet. Yeah, like pink and black shoes. It's so funny. Like, anytime people see anything pink and black or cat related, they legit send it to me, because they're like, I saw this and I thought of you. Like, you've built your brand well when you've created an experience and tied those with enough visual triggers to get people to draw all of those associations. So even when I'm like not intending to, sometimes when people like they do stuff with their plants or their cats, or they see something black and pink, they'll just randomly message me and they'll be like, hey, I saw this and I thought of you. That's kind of like a lot, that's kind of like an example of what it's kind of like to build a brand experience. And I feel like for every person, that is so vastly different, but it's something that is really important for you to be intentional about, because if you don't pay attention, then there could be a lot of gaps or inconsistencies if you're not intentional about being like, hey, at every touch point, at every opportunity that people interact with my brand, I want them to feel XYZ, whether I'm having a conversation with them, whether they see my email signature, whether they see my content, whatever, even if they're in my Zoom waiting room, right? Like, what's the message that they see and what's the feeling that they get? The more granular you get and the more you pay attention to the many little opportunities that people have to encounter you, there's so much magic in that. A brand is actually not the big things. It's a whole bunch of little things that connect together to consistently form a bigger picture. And that is actually where the magic is. It's actually in the tiny little details that most people often miss.
The best way, at least I've heard of getting those details is actually hearing what other people say. I guess that would be difficult if you have no clients yet. But then go out and look on the internet and see what people like. Because the answer is out there somewhere. It's just about looking in the right place. When it comes to branding, is there a specific mistake people make that gets on your nerves? Like, oh, I have for me, it's people not cutting the intros of the videos because it's literally a 10-second job. Not that hard. Gets on my nerves every time.
I feel you. Honestly, when it comes to branding, I say the cardinal sin is taking a look at what everyone else is doing in your industry and being like, all right, based on what everyone else is doing, I'm going to do XYZ. And it's about looking outside first and then deciding how you want to be packaging your brand. That might work to some extent from a business branding perspective, where you're doing research to figure out how you can strategically position yourself in the market. But if you do that, it almost feels inauthentic, because when you think about it from an identity standpoint, if I were to translate it into a personal branding perspective, that's the same as you taking a look at everyone else in the world and in your life and being like, okay, based on what everyone else is doing, here's what I'm going to be, here's who I'm going to be to stand out and be unique. Like, if you translate it into that, don't you think it sounds kind of weird? It's instead of being like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm like, here's what I'm interested in, this is just what feels real to me because that's who I am. How can I, in a very creative way, capture and communicate that in a way that people can see and experience on the outside, right? Instead of the outside in conversation, it's the inside out conversation. And if I were to now zoom back into the business perspective, it goes down to understanding what about your business and brand is actually unique. Like, it maybe you provide a service that's exactly the same as everyone else, but is there a way that you can create an experience that's different from what's out there? Is it because you have a specific background that's completely unique that allows you to serve your customers in a very different way, right? Like, is it because you have this crazy cool offering? Is it just because like, I can kind of go on, but there's a lot of different ways that you can differentiate yourself, and it's natural because you do business differently than the person next door. Ice cream shop one does ice cream different from ice cream shop two. You both sell ice cream. You both probably even have the same flavors, right? Like, but it goes down to a lot of the small little things, right? Like, maybe you get a cute little wooden spoon that's got like this, like whatever it is. Like, there are always different experiences that can make your brand stand out and be unique. And it's about really understanding what that is, and then finding a creative way to really put that out there so then people can see it and expect it when they work together with you. So it's very much an inside out conversation rather than an outside in, because when you start from outside in, then it becomes very much a people pleasing conversation. And if you start a brand from that specific angle, you end up in some pretty muddy waters, because the way that you position your brand is not what's special about me. It's actually how can I fill in the gaps of what everyone else is not? Like, that sounds and feels kind of weird. And at that point, you don't really nail down on your identity. You just kind of strategically position yourself, but you don't actually know what actually makes you unique. And from a brand evolution standpoint, not knowing that can make it very challenging to make decisions long-term for your brand that allows you to stay consistent, right? If you don't know what the core of your brand is, if you just do the strategic positioning thing based on everyone else in your industry, but you don't actually know what makes you special, it's going to be really hard for you in the long term to consistently create content and offers and experiences that hit the target on the head every single time, because you don't know what that target is. Versus doing it from the inside out, you naturally already know what is that really primary thing that people love you for. And then no matter what you do, you can just continue to zone in and focus on that, just sharing it in many different creative ways.
To hit the point even more, taking like back to looking at people and looking how other people operate. At least when you said that to me, I'm like, yeah, 80% of them are doing it wrong. So you're gonna go a lot the wrong way by doing that approach. And also, it's a good strategy for starting a business, looking at where's the gap in the market. It should have been done a lot earlier than the branding phase. Like, that's very, 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 very early. This is too late going to market kind of thing. We should have established that a bit before. Or maybe you need to scroll back the clock a little bit.
Absolutely.
So talking about the inside out method, what is some good questions to ask yourself besides how am I unique? But like, to give it a bit more meat, like if you can give us a couple more questions that the person could ask.
Absolutely. It's a great question, and I'll ask some very general questions that apply both to business and personal brands, just because if we're talking about this from a service provider standpoint. So especially when it comes to figuring out what are the things that make you special, a few things that you could consider taking a look at include your offering. Is there anything about what I do from a product or service standpoint that's unique compared to what everyone else is doing? Another thing you can look at is, are the types of people that I serve unique, right? Like, is there a very small group of people that I specialize in supporting that most people kind of overlook, or maybe most people are generalists. They kind of just serve a really broad public, a broad group of people. A good example of that is if you only work with people who are hella nerdy. Like, maybe you have an ice cream shop, but maybe you deck it out with like a lot of gaming stuff, right? Like, there's Pokemon and Minecraft and all sorts of different games and stuff that are in the shop. Most likely, you're gonna attract not just people who love ice cream, but people who love games and who love nerding out over it. Maybe you can have board games that people can play while they're eating their ice cream. Maybe you can have events and tournaments that you host inside your ice cream shop. And that would be an example of niching down when it comes to the specific types of people that you love working with. So that's another way you could find a very unique approach to the way that you do things. Another thing could just be the way that you present yourself. Maybe it is your style. Maybe it is your vibe. Maybe you're like a business coach, and in a world where everyone is very suit and tie, you are running around in graphic tees, you're sipping pina coladas on a beach, you're very chill and loose, and you're not buttoned up at all. Maybe that approach is just something that's different, because what's typical in your industry is the opposite. It is very buttoned up and suit and tie. So maybe your style or your energy or approach could be very different. Some of it could just be your background, right? Like, for example, there are a lot of people who are business coaches out there. But for example, I'm actually in the process of planning out a new transition I'm going to be going into in the new year, where I'm going to be setting up a personal branding agency that is going to be geared towards supporting creative entrepreneurs with figuring out both the marketing and business chops to be able to monetize the thing that they love for a living. And the differentiation, I would say, in this case is where I would use my background as a creative entrepreneur, where I started out doing business not knowing anything about business. And when it comes to the edge that I would have in supporting specifically this group of people, is my background, where I understand that when it comes to building a business as a creative entrepreneur, outside of all of the networking and all of the paperwork and all of the technical things you do on the forward facing side of things, you actually have double the amount of work on the back end, because you've got homework. You've got to actually do the project. You got to serve your clients. And most business coaches who coach creatives but don't have a creative background, I'm sorry, but you don't understand that, because you just talk for a living. Like, you don't understand that by the time a creative gets off of that sales call, there's another 12 hours of work that has to go in, and their energy spikes and peaks at different times. Most creatives, their energy peaks from 3 p.m. to 2 a.m. Their working and energy schedules are different. The suggestions that you have to offer for the way that they should construct their schedule, their workflows, and all of the way that they deliver their service, you're not going to be able to provide them with the level of expertise that matches them, because you have not lived and traveled that path as well. So in this case, that's an example of how someone's unique background could also help inform and be that differentiating factor. It's kind of like that Me Too, where I've traveled that same path, so I am more equipped to help you along that same path as well. So those are just a few. Honestly, there's a lot more. I think one more thing that I'll throw in there is just core values. I think it's super I think it's understated how important core values are, where you would want to attract and work with people who value and believe in the same things as you. And the more upfront you are about some of the things that you believe in, you might start attracting people in that world too. I'm just going to go back to the ice cream shop analogy, for example. I don't know why I'm thinking about ice cream, but
You like ice cream a
if we
lot,
have,
apparently.
yeah, but if you have like an ice cream shop that says, you know, we have vegan options, cruelty free, good for the environment, we are sustainable in all of our packaging and in our processes, you're going to also attract a very specific type of person that also believes in those things. So they feel like, when I purchase your ice cream, I am being good to my body, I'm being good to my environment, and I am giving back, because that is something that both of you believe in, and you can actually niche down even in terms of that as well. So those are just a few. There's actually quite a few more, but I'm going to say high level, all of those pillars actually apply both to business brands and personal brands when it comes to just creative ways that you can figure out how you stand out in the market and what actually sets you apart and makes you different.
Well, since you keep talking about ice cream, if you ever want to open an ice cream store, you can niche it down to Danish ice cream because we do make the best ice cream in the entire world. It ain't healthy. It ain't. There's a bunch of fat and sugar in it. It ain't healthy. It's
Yeah.
natural, but don't need too much. But it's good. It's very, 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 very good. So,
Oh, I gotta try it one day. And honestly, I like the way that you led in with that, because that would be a good point to lean into with marketing, where you could be like, it tastes hella good, but we're going to be honest, it is not very good for your health, but come treat yourself once in a while, right? Like some people, honestly, most people love honest marketing. Like there's
but
so
we can't
much.
people that one. Like, wait, what?
I would totally buy it. I'm like, I love marketing that is just really real, because we've gotten past that phase where everything is just so fake and superficial. Like the full-time job that I had before I started my business was doing graphic design for a local marketing company that sold a lot of natural health products. They also did skincare. And I remembered very clearly, I think I spent like 2 straight days, 8 hours a day, polishing a stock model's face so that it was so smooth, that it looked like it was appropriate to go onto the package of a face mask, packaging design. And we live in a highly photoshopped society where everything is airbrushed, everything is so polished and perfect that we've gotten to that point where we know now that everything is fake and we are calling for the thing that is real. And you see that shift when you look at advertisements, that it is very real. You see people who, no, they're not supermodels. They're just normal everyday people actually showing and testing products and being like, hey, like this actually does work, or like, no, this is actually bullshit. Like this does not work. People want real things in marketing now. And the more real and honest you could be with your customers, honestly, they're going to appreciate you for it.
So be real in your branding. That's one thing I'm getting it. I'm talking about like that, helping personal creators. I would love to hear your thought on a personal brand versus a traditional brand like a McDonald's, Coca-Cola, a big company.
It is the exciting thing that about the time that we live in now is that the way that branding is, it's evolved, because back then it was just the big corporations.
Yeah.
We didn't have easy access to the internet or social platforms. Small businesses, even though they did existed, it was a very different game. Now we're actually in the age where anyone can be a business owner. Technically, if you are self-employed and you're a freelancer, yeah, you could. The argument is you have a business, because there's only 2 ways in this world that you can make money. You work for someone or you work for yourself. There's literally only 2 ways. And if you work for yourself, and as is the case for a lot of people now, where you've got your own thing, we have all of the tools that are available to us today to totally run without a team. You could actually do it yourself, because we have all of the technical tools. You could be your own marketing. You could be your own PR. You could be your own sales, because we've got all of these technical tools. And the beautiful thing about personal branding versus business branding is that it all goes down to the way that you want to package and communicate that experience, where business brands, it is more applicable to people who have a bit of a bigger infrastructure with their team. Even if you're just starting out in your business, but you have plans to expand and have a team of people underneath this umbrella, I'm going to say, you're probably going to want to package it as a business brand, because it's just going to be kind of weird if you fly underneath your personal name, but then have a bunch of other people who are not you representing the business. Unless you're a law firm or an accounting firm, where I know in those industries, it's very typical to go with the last name of the founder. That's just kind of how it is. Initials of said founders, if there's multiple founders. That's very typical in that industry. But I'm going to say, like, kind of blanket statement. Yeah, like, it's easy for that.
Nobody's finding my company.
Well, yeah, like if you have like a unique last name, definitely you can do that. But the purpose of a business brand is to prepare for bigger infrastructure. But because of the power of technology, more and more you're going to find that there are a lot of people who are business owners where it's literally just them. And everybody that would supposedly be in their team, if they had like a typical business structure, are kind of replaced with all of the technology that we have going on here, right? Like you have the ability to do your own marketing on social media. You have access to Canva, which technically is free. If you want to go ham, you could have a paid subscription, but everything that you need to actually run a business is actually available at your fingertips. We even have opportunities to scale nowadays, where you can have sales funnels, you can automate things. So you literally do not need a team in order to run your business. And for those people who are, I would just say, solo creators or service providers, having a personal brand is actually honestly, I'd say it's a lot of fun because you are your business, and there are so many ways where you can add personality to the way that you package and present yourself. This is kind of where the conversation gets kind of interesting, where there are boundaries that you do need to set, right? Because does that mean I have to share everything about my life, right? Like when it comes to having an honest personal brand, there are some questions that people often ask between how much do I share on the personal side to connect with people, but like, am I allowed to keep things private? How much of the business stuff do I talk about before like I turn off all of the people that I actually have like a personal relationship with? The lines can get kind of blurry when you run your business for a living. And I'd say that for every person, the boundaries and where you draw those lines is completely different. One thing that I do encourage people to do, though, when it comes to having a personal brand is always the inside out conversation. Most people, they tend to look around at what everyone else is doing and be like, okay, based on what all of what's happening outside of me, I'm going to like position myself and I'm going to look like this and do that. Yes, that's a good starting point if you just want to like play around and have fun. But if you really want to do it right, it always starts with asking yourself, well, how do I want people to see me? Like legit, who am I, right? Like, what do I want people to know about me? And then what's a creative way that I can communicate and capture that on platforms such as social media or on my website? How do I communicate that in a creative way using words and using visuals? And that's usually the part where people get kind of stuck because we're not, I don't think anybody is professionally trained to communicate about themselves on the internet. And I like to say that a lot of the work that I do, especially when it comes to personal branding, is to help improve the overall literacy of entrepreneurs online in learning how to communicate about themselves in an effective way that is fun, but also not weird and creepy and still professional on platforms such as like social media or on your website. And there are certain rules in terms of how you can do that in a way that's effective, but is not borderline crazy. So
A little bit of crazy is good.
little bit of crazy.
One of my more successful LinkedIn posts, I'm pretty sure I called everybody, not everybody, some of the people reading it pricks. I do recall that. And I'm reading a book by Stephen Benelli, Diary of a CEO, and he actually recently, in the part I listened to at least, talked about if you do what everybody else is doing, then our brain just goes numb because it registers, I've seen this a million times, I don't need to pay attention. It's the exact same thing when I get on a flight because I felt like I've gotten that brief about the emergency exit, how to open it, where to go back and forth, life jackets, a million times. And they haven't changed anything. Most of the planes are the same anyway. So
exactly,
go and spice it a little bit up. And to the person like that's watching this, they're thinking about, is my brand okay? Like, how would you recommend them to go out and do like a brand checkup?
One thing that I like to tell people is that only you will know when is the right time to work on your brand, because only you will know what's the vision inside your head and how effectively are you putting it out there into the world. And a good way to know whether or not you're hitting the target on the head is checking in on your confidence levels when you send your social media profiles to people, when you send a link to your website. How do you feel? Like when you network and you tell people to check out your stuff, when you put in your links into the chat, do you have that kind of queasy feeling in your stomach where you're like, here are my links, but don't look too far because, oh God, it looks kind of bad and I'm kind of sort of embarrassed, but look at my stuff, but don't look too much. Like if you have that feeling, okay, then maybe there's a chance that what you're trying to put out is not hitting the mark. You don't have to be like a rocket scientist when it comes to design. You don't need to have a good eye or be artistic to know the feeling in your gut when people look at your stuff and you're kind of like, I feel kind of uncomfortable. You know, it's good when you want people to look at your stuff. You are so excited. And when you put it out there, you can't wait to hear their feedback. You're like, go check out my website and then let me know afterwards because I know it's awesome, right? Like, not to sound egotistical, but when you
go check out your
carry
website,
yourself
is that
a
what you're
certain
saying?
way, no, that's just like legit an example. But if I were to translate it into like an easier analogy, it's kind of like walking into a networking event in your PJs versus your best suit, right? Like the way that you carry yourself and just the way that you feel is going to be very different. If you're going in your best clothes, right? Like you did your hair, you don't have pimples on your face, like your suit is like well ironed. For me, it's like I'm in heels, there's no cat hair all over everything. Like I am polished, fleek, you know? Like I feel good about the way people see me, and I walk in and I'm like, I want people to talk to me. You have that attitude when you walk in because you feel good. But if you walk into a networking event, everyone's in their suit and ties, and you go in your PJs, fuzzy slippers and bathrobe sort of deal with a teddy bear, you're gonna feel a little weird, even if that, you know, like, unless that's your vibe and you're like, I want people to know me and I've got a sleep company or whatever, like, you're gonna feel kind of weird and you won't be as inclined for people to talk to you. Even if people do approach you, you're gonna, inside, you might be kind of squirming. You're like, oh, geez, like, I don't feel like I belong here. Like, something feels weird or off, or I don't feel super comfortable. That's exactly the feeling that I could equate it to when your online wardrobe or the way that you're packaging or presenting your brand doesn't quite do you justice. You're like, see me, but don't really see me. Like, that's kind of the feeling that I go off of. And yeah, even from a design perspective, that's kind of where I would say I'd recommend you talk to an expert when you start feeling that and it's starting to affect the way that you're showing up. When it's affecting you putting yourself out there, that's when you really should talk to somebody about your branding, because that actually prevents you from putting yourself out there with the confidence that your future clients want to see from you. It's going to affect your sales, and the people that you attract, I guarantee you are not going to be happy with the types of people you attract, because the energy you put out is going to be the energy that you attract. So when it comes to a lot of like DIY brands, I say it's okay in the beginning. Mess around, have fun, play around with it. You don't know what works until you try it. That being said, when it comes to DIY brands, if you put out a DIY brand, you're most likely going to attract DIY clients. DIY clients are going to be penny pinching you until the ends of the earth. They're only going to want to pay you on their deathbed when the service that you offer is the thing that's going to save them from dying. And they're probably going to haggle you at every step of the way. Like, what you put out is going to be what you attract. So that's something that I definitely do want to put out there. So when it comes to attracting more higher caliber clients and increasing your confidence levels when you just put yourself out there, definitely recommend working with an expert. But honestly, mess around, play around, and have fun and experiment with your brand leading up to that. You don't know what feels good until you try it. And I actually recommend for people, do the DIY thing for a little bit, so then at least you can rule out the things that don't work, that you don't like, so that when you actually do talk to an expert, you've kind of at least done a little bit of the process of elimination. You're like, okay, I've tried all of these things. I know that this is the thing that I want to communicate. This is like the thing that makes my brand special, but I don't have the design chops to actually make it look good. Can you please help me? Right? Like, that's usually the stage at which I recommend you talk to a professional, but do play around with it in the beginning, because there are some things that only you are going to be able to have the answers for in the very early stages.
I like that. And a bit of advice for everybody: don't hackle me on your deathbed, because you're going to be dead. I don't know. Not my problem. I'm good.
Exactly.
We don't have time for any more questions, sadly. Let us know if you want part 2 or us further to go into a specific subject. But if people want to find more, they don't want to wait for episode 2, where can they find you, Rachel?
I am all over the internet, but my favorite places to hang out are Instagram first. Find me at my handle, Rachel T.Y. Lee. I am also on LinkedIn, though. My name is just Rachel Lee, but there are a million of them. So if you type in the URL, it'll be linkedin.com/in/Rachel T.Y. Lee. Then you're going to be able to find me. My name is too generic, so you type in Rachel Lee, you're going to come up with like a million searches. So Instagram, LinkedIn, and I also have a link to my website as well.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This conversation was so fun.